Gross, professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology. And FIT is so excited to host today's conversation with Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, and Greg Petro, CEO of First Insight. Greg and Robin are such influential thought leaders in the industry, so we're fortunate to have this opportunity to hear from them today on this important topic that's on everyone's mind. Please remember to put questions in the Q&A, and I'll be back later to field your questions. So let's get started.
Thank you, Naomi, for your kind introduction. And we at the Robin Report, by the way, are very pleased to be partners with First Insight and FIT. And Greg, a huge thanks to First Insight and you for sponsoring this event and our conversation. And boy, you and I haven't caught up with each other for a long time. So we've got a lot to talk about today. It is a big topic, how to future-proof your business. Staying agile during economic uncertainty is a challenge for every business right now. I don't have to tell you that. And it's a major headache for retailers. So Greg, let's get into it. We all know that everyone has been through a rough time because of the pandemic, and then of course the supply chain collapse and a bunch of other stuff. So how have consumers shifted their behavior, Greg, over the past few years? I know you've collected a lot of insightful data, and give us a little understanding of what it reveals.
Well, Raman, first, it is great to see you. It's been quite a while. And Naomi, thank you for the introduction. Obviously, a lot's changed. One of the last things that I think when we saw each other in person pre-pandemic, the world and the cycles of decisions were occurring, and we kept speaking about it at increasing rates. Consumer behavior had been shifting for some period of time. And, it was clear at that point in time of early 2020 that the consumer not only had all the information necessary, but they had begun to fracture their behavior. And a lot of people termed it micro segmentation. But then you all at the same time, as the pandemic, played itself out, and we collected data and started sharing that with the industry beginning in February of 2020, and there were only 8 cases here in the U.S. And what we saw was not just the fragmentation and the behavioral change on the consumer side, but that same changes and challenges occurring on the supply side, the manufacturers, the retailers, the brands. So you had this situation occurring where there was an enormous amount of dynamic action occurring in the marketplace. And, obviously that has flowed through, and we've seen it, whether it be in supply chain disruptions that continue to occur, the inflation aspects, the concerns around recessionary aspects, and, even employment. So consequently, I think what we have is a situation where the consumer is almost, at a point of the pinnacle of dynamic response, where they look for product, how they're looking for product, the trends that they're creating, the styles that they're creating, the things that they're looking at. And you also have an underlying fundamental change. And speaking to a number of CEOs recently, that there's so much dynamics occurring in the supply side that it's hard to manage. And, I was just to conclude the thought, I was speaking to a bunch of folks just this past week, a number of CEOs, and the one of the final comments that came to me was, they don't think the fight's going to change, meaning, the challenges that they're fighting, they're not going to change. This is going to be the normality going forward in how they manage their business.
Yeah, it's technology is playing a major factor, and I think we're just early in it, and we're going to see that roll out in many different ways. And I totally agree with you about the consumer, but how do retailers respond strategically to these changes? I mean, the past is the past,
Right.
but what does it predict about not just the present but the future? Or are we on a whole new playing field, Greg? For example, it seems to me that the pandemic turned accurate forecasting on its head. I say accurate forecasting, that's almost an oxymoron, as we both know, right?
Right.
Anyway, what I mean is that by that is that the pandemic was a first time ever. So, there's nothing to benchmark it. There's no basis from the past to give us some guidance going forward. There's no history. So, what's your take in this playing field that came out of the blue?
Yeah. Well, think about it this way, Robin. I think the first step is that you're absolutely right. When you haven't experienced something in the past, it's really hard to forecast against it. We all know, in fundamentals of forecasting, you have to have a lot of history, and it has to be very constant. And then, you're still going to have error rates, but it's better. When you have a very dynamic situation, there's really no model. There's few models that you can use. There's a lot to be learned in corollary to the equity and bond markets is what I would draw. A lot of people, a lot of very smart people have been working on econometric modeling and how stocks are likely to perform, and equities and bonds are likely to perform into the future. And some of it's predicated on the past performance, and a lot of it's predicated on what is the expectation or anticipatory data, right? And those are the companies that can invest against that efficiency frontier and risk scenario properly are the ones that benefit the most. I think from my perspective, whether you're a CEO at a strategy level that you're referring to, or you're a merchant, a buyer, picking an assortment, the same could be applied in both cases, whether you're doing strategy or assortment planning, which is to say, you've got to look at a series of historical data points to foundationally base yourself, right? But at the same time, the percentage of data that you're collecting or using that is more anticipatory has got to lend itself to that degree, meaning you've got to weight more information that is anticipatory data than it is historical data. So companies that are leveraging historical models and using that in a way similar to what they did pre-pandemic, I think are going to be challenged. And we've seen some great companies recently announce inventory positions just in the last week where they had misses, whether it be for product flow or other things. And a lot of companies have called them out for that. I think that what can be gleaned from this, and what I think from a strategic perspective companies could do, is certainly leverage and data that is available or can be structured from forms, whether it be consumer data or other data points that are outside of their historical data set, and blend them together in a way that makes a much better model of what might likely to occur than what they've used in the past. And I think it's clear the companies that are doing that and doing it effectively are winning.
Interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you're into the dynamic pricing in a big way and other ways. Agile, the word agile and dynamic are kind of twins or something, right?
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. So, on top, Greg, on top of all the health concerns that seem to be permanent, what can you tell us about how inflation and the threat of a recession is affecting consumers? It really seems like the perfect storm is facing all of us. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think, first of all, use the metaphor, the perfect storm, and many people have said, well, this situation or that. And, even back in 2008, when we were collecting data in the some of the financial crisis that we faced at that point in time, here's what I would say. The nature of the environment is going to be constantly disrupted. So this concept of perfect storm is going to be perfectly normal.
Interesting.
And so consequently, if we just accept that fact as the way behavior and how we need to behave to make decisions, what we will see is that whether it be inflation or inventory disruptions, there's something that's going to change. What I can tell you about inflation is this: we just collected data, we shared it recently, not just in the US, but around the globe in several countries, and 90+%, in fact, the number was 92% of consumers were concerned about inflation. 80% believed we were in a recession.
Yeah.
Now, generally speaking, what that indicates is that people are very, very concerned about this topic. The only number higher than that we've ever seen in our data set was 97%, and that was in February of 2020, that people were concerned about pandemic outbreak and their health concerns. So what I'm suggesting is it's not just a concern, it's a very serious concern to people, and their behaviors are likely to change when concerns are occurring. So what we've got to do is, and it's interesting because some of that data we collected a while ago, and speaking about anticipatory data. So if I told you quite a while ago, hey, people are really concerned about inflation, their behaviors are going to change, and you knew it was going to happen, what would you do about it? That's where I would say executives, merchants, and organizations, need to absorb the facts and understand how to react to them and how to respond to them in order to remain agile. They can no longer predicate their opinion based upon a limited amount of data and feeds.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a key point going into the future. The more data and the more accurate the data, the better you're going to be able to respond.
I think you are so right, spot on. And that's why I like to talk to you so often when we haven't seen each other in a long time. But each one of these topics that we're talking about could be hour-long conversations in themselves, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so Greg, consumers are clearly a huge piece of the equation, which they always are. In fact, I believe they still have all the power. They run the industry basically. But with the collapse of the supply chain, and as you said, it hasn't been fixed yet, another unprecedented mess that has no historical basis, right? How are retailers and brands coping with the current challenges of this horrific inventory overload, if you will, of more stuff than consumers need or want, and scarcity of the inventory they do want? I mean, it's a really weird thing, is it not?
It is true. I mean, if you think about it, it's an interesting study that supply chain has a concept of the bullwhip effect, which is, if there is inconsistency in delivery of inventory, you can be over inventoried and then under inventoried and then over purchased to react to the under inventory, and yet demand can remain fairly steady. I think the miss here is twofold. One, the expectation has to be managed that we will have for a while yet inconsistencies of delivery, meaning, some of the ports still are open and shut and now just reopening. The flow of goods, the backlog between here and the West Coast and other places, and just the general processing, right, of this merchandise has been disrupted. That will take a period of time, years, as much as we want it to be fixed today. It's going to take a while to work its way through, but you can anticipate that. The second thing that you can anticipate, I think, is the understanding, if you reach out to consumers and ask them to become involved in this process, which they want to do, as you said, they're in control at this stage anyway, involve them in understanding it, they're willing to share that. And what we're seeing is companies that do that have the ability to begin to manage expectations on the demand side, because they have visibility into what the demand is likely to be in the product, so that they can focus on the ones that they need to have. So I think, to answer your question very simply, Robin, it really comes down to, expecting a lot of dynamic behaviors in the supply chain, but the mitigation of that is the understanding of where demand is likely to be on the consumer side, and you just have to be able to accept the fact that this isn't going to change. And I think that some of the tools, and it's clear based upon the announcements of some companies just recently, some very well-known companies missing on inventory, that the tools that they do have are not working. If they were, we wouldn't be in the cases that we are. But nobody's perfect. No one has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
But incrementally, as we've seen over the history of our experience in retail, there are gains to be made at each stage in the process. And I think there's a lot to be gained through our learnings in COVID, as long as everyone accepts the fact that we're not going to go back to the way things used to be.
Well, somebody coined this term inventory optimization, which broadly and at a macro level is exactly what you're talking about. And, a colleague of mine out in Toronto, Marshall Kay, is on top of this. He says RFID is going to be the answer, because you got to be able to track every SKU and build, this dynamic process that you're talking about, and being very agile. But that is a big topic. I know there was a firm called Select, SELECT, that Nike acquired simply for their ability to do that. So, all of this, Greg, is intertwined with inflation and the current recession. And I think the people that say we're already in it, I think they're right. But so short term, as we head into the holiday season, what is your take on promotional activity and pricing strategy? Good luck.
I'll be honest with you. I think that, at least, let me back up. It's a serious question. Obviously, the holiday period is a serious period of time for retailers and brands. It's one where most are going to make or break the year. I think many expect, as we've seen in Q3, and we will likely see in Q4, it's not going to be a bad season, right? Generally speaking, I think that's a consensus. I think it's probably accurate, and foregoing some unusual causal events, that might be the outcome, that is likely to be the outcome for 2022. As you look towards 2023 and beyond, into 2023, I think the serious recessionary concerns that many expect are building into the second half of 2023. Now, that's not to say that we haven't already been in a recession, because, according to definition, we've had 2 quarters that were down in Q1 and Q2, which in thesis is, and according to everything I ever studied in economics, is a recession.
Yep.
So that, if you say that's where we are, but I think most of us are seeing a pretty good Q3 and Q4. And then as we go into the second half of the year. Now, to answer your question, pricing, well, look, it's the lever for managing demand. Our customer base at First Insight are utilizing pricing enormously throughout this entire process, both here in the US and abroad around the world, because inflationary aspects outside of China, which is, I think, at only 2% compared to the United States, which is 8.8 last statistic I heard, and 9.2 in other countries, that level of inflation has to be addressed through pricing adjustments. And after you raise the prices and you have excess inventory, well, I think there's only one simple answer is how do you adjust pricing downward to relate to the inventory? Because that's how I know you increase unit velocity, Robin, right? Unless something's changed in retail that I missed in the last 40 years, that's the way it works. So if that's the case, then the question becomes, how are they adjusting pricing? And if they're going back to the old model, I can tell you that's a mistake, right? What we're seeing as best practices, because optimizations work, as you and I both know, we've been in the optimization world or around it long enough, it uses history. If history isn't, as we said earlier, not a good basis right now, well, then how are you creating optimal pricing? You're going back and either using history or you're guessing. And what I learned in the old days, I still think is true today. I say the old days, but I go back a couple of decades, is very simple. The first markdown's the cheapest. It is the one that liquidates the most amount of inventory at the optimal price. And my question is, if your strategy is at 25% historically, maybe it could be 15. And what we're seeing with companies today is an enormous amount of price testing to understand what that promotional activity means. Maybe it's buy one, get one, maybe it's buy 3. There's a variant going on right now. And the fact of the matter is, it's easy enough to test in market to understand price elasticity at this stage. And with it being dynamic, you're at a stage where the best practice companies are out there testing it, if not on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis. We had one customer who's raised prices twice within one season, and are now looking at how they're going to adjust prices down. So it's a very fluid environment. And I think, the use of agility and data at the same time are a perfect mix.
Wow. And again, no historical benchmark, right? There's so many variables involved in this one. For a long time, I was making presentations. We've been overstored in this industry for, Greg, I don't know, half a century probably. And so, as you say, the catalyst for getting rid of some of it, it's pricing. I mean, it's a supply demand situation. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. And there's another big issue. What should companies be doing to future-proof their business, as you call it, and prepare, for the next round of market disruption, whatever that might be? It's looking like disruption, Greg, is the new normal. A lot of retailers out there really did get caught flat-footed before. So how they avoid doing that again? How do they avoid it? What tools do they need? Probably some of yours.
Well, and we've been very fortunate in our organization and the adoption rate that we've seen in the industry. But I think more broadly, Robin, to speak to the topic, and happy to discuss in more detail what some companies are trying to do and what they actually are doing to make themselves have a competitive advantage. Here's the first and very simple thing. If you've landed in an alien environment, something that is highly unusual, I think the first thing you would not do is take off your life support system and go wander out into the wilderness, not knowing what's out there. The thing that you would do is you would send out, reconnaissance or information gathering to figure out what the environment is and where you are. And what I keep suggesting when I'm speaking to executives is, look, the environment's new and it's hostile. It is. If it were easy, you would be making lots of money. And, a lot of people are challenged. So if that's the case, why wouldn't you be reaching out to consumers to collect data? To understand where they are today, to contemplate the idea of jumping on an airplane, to give you a metaphor, and do a store visit seems just wildly out of bounds after we're just coming out of a pandemic, to think that we can't collect data from people, right? When we have technologies like we're on right now, and or lots of data collection mechanisms like our listening platform at First Insight that help you collect reams of data from lots of consumers and try to figure out what's going on in the world around you. It seems ludicrous to me if somebody's hunkering down and going, let's think about it, or let's jump on an airplane and see if we can visit 3 stores.
Got it. Yeah. Well, there's that old line of choking on data, but starving for knowledge and information. So it does boil down to the biggest job. You got more data than you need, but you also need to know how to analyze it, right? And to pick the data that's going to be relevant to your particular business. Greg, can you give us some examples of brands and retailers that you believe are getting it right? For example, what are First Insight customers doing to successfully navigate product and pricing in this current economic climate? What tools do you have to help them?
Yeah. Well, I think 15 years ago when we created this space, the intention was, an environment that I worked in as a merchant and a retailer, where I would go to the stores and I would ask consumers what they thought and they wanted. And, this was a period of time when we could do it, when there were 16 stores or 80 stores. Now these organizations are running large, 800, 900, 1,000, several thousand store locations. It's not feasible. The second piece is, to your point, data is ubiquitous, but I think insights, this is what we've said all along, are rare.
Yes.
They're the nuggets that help inform you to make decisions. So how can you collect data, ensure it's the right folks that you're getting information from, and then take that data and use it in a way that's actionable to make an impact? So obviously, as I said, 15 years ago, we set out to transform this industry and other industries by creating that platform to do that. And fortunately, our customer base continues to grow and has grown quite significantly over the years. And the customers are using this platform, but the platform itself has grown in many ways. So we have 4 components. I know there are other mechanisms out there. And what I would say, and I keep saying to the industry, is I don't care what you do. I really care that the industry is successful and thrive and survive, because, when the ocean rises, all the boats go with it. And the idea is, that we can all succeed here. But the concept is you've got to engage consumers. That's number one. That is the one piece of the mechanism. And it isn't in sales data. Sales data is historical. So you might as well put that in the bucket with the other stuff you just mentioned, Robin, in forecasting. You need to actively engage them. So that's the first thing. But how you do it and the way our customers are doing it is very unique. So our platform has multiple components to it. One is around product selection and pricing. It's probably the two components that everyone knows us for and have used for a number of years. Some of our customers date back 12, 13 years in giving them an advantage to understand where the consumer is headed in those components. But then there's also marketing and targeting and segmentation and advertising. Right. And engaging them in a way to help them understand what it is they should be putting in front of the consumer to activate them. And then there's the planning component, the interaction and the portfolio assessment of a product, a line, right? An assortment, whatever you want to call it. It is the dynamic nature of determining when I add new products, how does that affect my reach? How does that affect my ability to meet my financial targets on a consistent basis? You talked about strategy. Plans are great to build, but if you can't make them, they're really quite useless, right? All of that, I think, and is being used right now within our customer base. And yet we also find interesting nuggets. We have a capability called Risky Product Alert. And the work that we've been doing in sustainability and ESG is quite significant. I said to folks, to quote somebody, we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. The customers want us to be sustainable, but they're not willing to pay for it. Everyone kind of knows that. All the data is suggesting it. So then does that mean we abandon sustainability? No. So how do we address that? We're helping people solve that problem. We're helping them solve Risky Product Alert, which is designs that are offensive. And, we have some very beautiful case studies that have stopped product in the design phase, early in the design phase, that had they been launched, they would have probably been pulled in minutes and wasteful of millions of dollars and loss of opportunity. So I think from our perspective, the whole objective that we talk about at First Insight and our goal is to be anticipatory by listening to the consumer. And obviously we have our own proprietary way of solving that. We think our science, based upon years of history and now hundreds of customers, that we've created the best and most sustainable and repeatable science there is in helping them understand who to listen to and how to listen to them better. So long answer to a pretty short question, Robin, but thank you for the question.
Well, I've got another one for you, but this reminds me of when I first met you, I don't know how many years ago. And you at that point told me what you were going to do, and you have done it. And I know from what I hear around the industry, you guys are a great help to a lot of these retailers because they need it now. As you say, they're in the fight. It's going to be with us for a long time. Right. So, but I do have one last question. What do you believe is in store for 2023, which you kind of talked about, but where do you see physical stores and malls headed? Where do you see them headed, and what do they need to do to stay relevant?
Right. Well, I think it's a great question because we're getting a lot of mixed signals, right? I wrote about this in Forbes and I called it the phygital world, right? Physical, digital world.
Yeah.
So the reality is,
I used that in an article just recently. I didn't know you coined it, or I would have credited it to you.
There's a lot of blending. There's a lot of blending between physical and digital.
Yeah.
But here's some interesting things that I had heard recently, is that there will be the most amount of store openings that have occurred in the last 5 years, new store openings, right? So we have, while we may be over indexed in sales or square footage per capita in the US, we're still opening stores, and that's happening quite a bit in Europe as well, who also is over square footage per capita.
Yep.
But part of that data also suggests that Gen Zs are interested in the physical experience. Look, it's their first time going out into the world, right? And engaging in a way that's interesting with the product. So that's a next generation that's to come. We would think about it if you thought about it from generational perspectives. Certainly different generations are going to have different experiences. But what we're seeing is the fact of the matter is almost every generation at this particular point in time is interested in engaging in the physical world. And if you think about it, Robin, I think it's quite fascinating juxtaposing that with sustainability. The idea of a physical store is far more sustainable than Amazon boxes showing up at your door every other day.
Great point, Greg. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so and then they package it and they ship it and then they have to return it, and all of the implications of that. So, I honestly believe that there might be a tipping point to be had still in the future. It may not be this year in 2023 upcoming, but where you will see a generation, which now all generations, according to our data, have caught up to Gen Zs and their concern around sustainability, thankfully. But the reality is it may be Gen Zs who, as boomers created the malls, maybe it will be Gen Zs who reinvigorate them because it's a sustainable model for them to attract and collect all the products that they want to experience in one trip, as opposed to 15 Amazon trucks, albeit electric. They're still burning coal or stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And Amazon, they figured out, they knew that they had to get into the omni-channel. They knew they had to get into brick and mortar. But guess what's happening? They're failing in all their tests. And I maintain that they don't have retail experience in their C-suites and senior levels. They don't have any brick and mortar retail experience, which is very interesting. I mean, they see the need for it. And I totally agree with you. I think that the Gen Zs are going to reinvigorate or force changes in those malls because it's probably a good idea. So anyway, Greg, as usual, I learn a lot when I'm around you, and you're doing a terrific job helping businesses navigate this mess. And we, like you, have as our mission to try to improve the industry. I'm doing it in a different way than you are, but I think that's a large vision, and I think it's working, hopefully, for you. And one last question, because FIT is our partner here, and their students, they'll use our conversation in their classroom. So what advice do you have for the next generation of retail leaders, these young people? What will make them well prepared, do you think, for a business increasingly dependent on data and analytics, as you so well point out? And how do we attract the best and the brightest away from all the tech startups?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I think it's a great question, because many people have said in retail, it's art and science, it's right and left brain. We have to have both. Someone's unique. And honestly, it's funny, in a number of folks that I know in my close circle are very engineering oriented and yet very creative. And many creative people that I know are very regimented in understanding and looking at certain data. I don't know you have to have a null set where, neither of them overlap. I think the future is really embedded in one of my earliest experiences, dating back like 5 years now, to autonomous retail, automotive driving. And I bought a car which actually turned in a corner for the first time. And this is a number of years ago, and it was shocking to me that that was actually possible. The reason I use that example, Robin, is as we think about the students and their engagement into their areas of interest, one is they have to be them. They have to be uniquely themselves and grow and prosper and foster the skills that they enjoy, which if they happen to be in the design and the very creative side, great, but not at the expense of validating some of those data points, right? And just ignoring them. At the same time, I think you can have all the data, but if you have no creativity, you're missing an enormous amount, right? And I'm sure I could come up with some great quote if I could remember it, but it'd be from somebody else, not me. Probably somebody like Albert Einstein about, it's really about thinking about the problem and then the solution comes out fairly easily. But I think the idea is there's the future and the current right now, even in the students that are out there, I would encourage them to, take something that stretches them in an area that they're uncomfortable with to learn more, because experiencing that is looking at it from a different lens. And I think the whole world, probably all of us, could look a little differently through somebody else's lens and benefit quite a bit.
That's a very good message for our young people. Very, very well put. And thanks again so much, Greg. And I think Naomi is going to be coming back with questions from our audience. Naomi, have you got some for us?
Absolutely. Those are such great pearls of wisdom. And thank you so much for the insight about the students. For sure, they'll be watching this replay, those that didn't watch it live. We do have some questions. So the first question, in a recent survey from First Insight, person said, I found it interesting that 23% of consumers are purchasing more store brands and private labels. So should retailers spend more time developing private label? And how can the voice of customer data help companies explore new private label opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's an interesting risk-reward balance. Private label represents an enormous reward if it's done properly, obviously in margin control of the environment, supply chain, et cetera. It's a risk if you don't get it right? Because you own it all. And I think that also the other piece of that is, and I've talked about this quite a bit and the data has shown it, if your inventory overlaps significantly with Amazon, and there's no differentiation or reason for you to be, then you're probably not going to be. So you've got to put a stake in the ground and you've got to make a decision. What I would say is before you make big bets, I would test as much as you possibly can, right? Just simply because, and again, I'm not here proposing First Insight or anything else. I think it's a great idea. If I were going to bet the farm, I would check it out and make sure it's actually going to be successful. But it's serious that not only are people shifting towards brands, but there is a brand affinity to private brand, and there appears to be a trend. What I can tell you from 2008 as well is if we do go into a recession, the desire for brand awareness or flashiness or whatever is going to decrease everywhere socioeconomically, including luxury. So if that happens at the end of 2023, which by the way, most companies are planning 2023 right now, and their logos are everywhere, in 2008, that did not bode well for most people, if we can all reflect back on that period of time.
Thanks, Greg. Here's another great question. Is there any indication whether outlet malls or full price malls will be favored based on your expectations?
It's interesting. I saw some data from another source. I'd hate to quote it because I'm not certain. And we do not have data that indicates off mall or mall premise or standalone store preferences. So to be honest, I don't have that data, but what I can tell you is that there is a preference leaning to the physical store. It's a great question by channel. And what I will do is actually have our marketing department look into that, because I think it's a fantastically good question to know. Yeah. I wish I could say more, but it would be hypothesis. Oop.
Okay, here's another question. So according to some of your information that you shared in your recent survey, International Inflation Report says that 94% of the consumers are concerned about recession, as you noted, and 87% looking for less expensive ways to shop. You talked about reducing prices and promotions that are obviously cutting into a lot of already smaller margins. So how does the price optimization software that you offer help retailers and brands select the right promotional strategy so that they can maximize their bottom line?
Yeah, so interesting. Our technology has the ability to help organizations set the initial price and forecast the actual consumption over various price point strategies. So typically when we're speaking about price optimization technology in my former life in supply chain technology, you're looking at existing products and actual sales rates and how to make markdowns. Our technology is really about where to set the price in the beginning to give you the optimal outcome throughout the entire life cycle. So there's a very distinct difference between the two. And I think what we're seeing is significant ability of products, and there's a percentage, in fact, of number of products that we test on an ongoing basis that can raise their prices. And I think that's going to be probably one of the bigger misses in companies that aren't using something, is they'll see sell-through rates, as Robin said, products that are gone off the shelves because they didn't understand that the demand was so high for that product that they could raise the price, because they don't have the ability to go back in the supply chain and make more and get it delivered in time. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be to set the initial price properly, and that's exactly what we do.
Great, thank you so much. Here's the last question. As we've discussed, the current economic landscape is full of uncertainty with changing consumer demands and supply chain disruption, as you've been talking about, both you and Robin. How can companies mitigate inventory risk and be better prepared for 2023?
Yeah, well, I
$64,000 question, right, Greg?
It is truly a challenge. Yeah, well, you know, I guess I don't quote many sports metaphors, but the one sport that I do quote is something that Wayne Gretzky said. He was a famous hockey player and scored, I think, to date still the most amount of goals, is the greatest goal scorer in hockey's history.
Yeah.
And he said his was the ability to anticipate where the puck was going. And, you know, maybe that reiterates what I was saying. If you can do that, then you're going to score a lot of goals.
Greg, that's a great line, which I've used in so many speeches. Gretzky, when asked what made him great, he says, "I go to where the puck will be."
Will be. There you go. That's exactly right.
I
Gotta
love
be
it.
able to anticipate. It's a perfect, I think,
Yeah.
right?
All right. Well, thank you so much, both Robin and Greg, and thank you to our audience. Thank you for the great questions. I thank you on behalf of myself and FIT. We're proud to have hosted this, and thank you for spending some time with us. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having me, and I get to see Greg again.
Yeah, Robin as well, and Naomi, thank you so much.
Sure.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a great